StreamYard does. And we are live. That's what we are. So we're live now on LinkedIn. Welcome, Tobias. Welcome to the studio here. Where are you currently?
I'm in Sheffield, in the UK.
Sheffield.
It's a couple of 100 miles north of London.
Awesome. And
Steel making.
I think there is no need to introduce you a lot because probably most people, at least in the Agile community, know you a lot, and you've done amazing work. Specifically in the past years, I've seen so many meaningful, and that's what our conversation is about: meaningful conversations, meaningful content to be offered to teams, to leaders, to coaches, anyone who wants to do something with their time better in an organization than just following a procedure, than following a process. And that's what today's conversation I want to start with. So first of all, welcome. I'm happy having you as a guest, happy being together with you in this conversation.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be here.
Again, we'll probably put a link to your profile because currently this is coming via my LinkedIn profile. So put it to yours too. That's it for the intro because we have our LinkedIn stuff there and people can see what we do and where we are. We'll add some more details. But for today, if we say meaningful conversation, and you remember, I set this up in a way with a title. Does Scrum make any sense? Some people might say, "Oh God, this is this typical clickbait, right? He just wants to push the button." But there is probably 21. There is probably a reason to look at that, and I looked at it from a way where I said, look at 20, now what is it, 15 years state of Agile, is this famous report. And this is just a report, another report, because I don't know the details, how these figures come together and how it's faked maybe, and how it's really useful and how it's analyzed properly. But there is a trend in there, and I can at least attach it to my biases. And I only live from biases, right? I'm a human being. Scrum growing more and more, becoming the most widespread method. In variations, I think there is something about 60% Scrum, and then there is Scrumban, and there is Scrum plus XP, and that's one thing. Ralph jumping in with a comment here. And on the other hand side, there is this barriers to adoption, which is another funny, let's say, phrase, because how adopting Agile and all these things, it's all about culture, leadership not there. No consistency in process and everything. So there is a limitation. Number one, so I see something constantly being a barrier over 15 years, if you like, and probably more. And second, I've been talking to lots of people, communities, and everything alike, of Scrum Masters, coaches, curious about what they want to learn and see. And all I get is, how do I make sure that people follow my agenda? How do I make sure every role is doing what they're supposed to do? And what about story points? And I'm just turning away and saying, can we go deeper? So I have some feeling there is something challenged, the way we approach this concept of Scrum, whatever we call it, and as it is now in the industry, if you like. What's your observation, Tobias, on this?
Well, the initial question, does Scrum make sense in 2021? I think it makes as much sense as it ever did. If it made sense when it was first developed, I think it makes the same sense now. The world is somewhat different. Software world especially is speeded up, hasn't it? So we've got much faster at doing stuff. So, in original Scrum recommended cycles of 30 days, for example. These days, that's quite a long time between iterations. And so you now see teams doing a week or two. But other than that, it's essentially the same thing. And so if it made sense then, it makes sense now. And it does make sense to me. It makes really perfect sense to me. Now, the other observation you said was that Scrum is, rolling out and being adopted everywhere. And it sort of is, I would say. The name is, anyway. The word Scrum is. I was just thinking as you were talking, if you took the S from the beginning of Scrum and put it at the end, you get crumbs. And I think crumbs are what people are adopting, the crumbs of Scrum. little bits and pieces, and pieces that don't even belong in Scrum. The story points is a great example. People think, if you're doing Scrum, you have to have story points. There's no relationship between those two things. So people are trying to, there's a bandwagon jumping effect, isn't there? Because some people have had success with various agile approaches, not least extreme programming. I mean, let's just be really clear about that. The quality of the software we build over the last 20 years is vastly improved because of the work of people like Kent Beck and Ron Jeffries and Bob Martin and the clean code movement. So there's significant developments through that. But Scrum was originally designed to help software development teams create a framework in which to work. It was never supposed to be a prescription for how to build software. It didn't ever say anything about how to build software in there. It just said, here's a structure to work with. Now, if you think about the simplicity of Scrum is what I like about it. So if you're doing any kind of creative act, no matter what it is, you're doing a piece of artwork, or you're cleaning up your neighborhood, or you're baking a cake, or cooking dinner, or resculpting your garden, or something like that. In any of those situations, how do you begin? You begin by talking about what you're going to do, right? So you have some form of what we now call planning meeting. There's some plan that's being made. What is it going to look like? How are we going to do it? What's the approach is going to be? So we sit down and we talk about it, and we don't talk about it for too long, because if we talk about it for too long, we don't do anything, right? So if you're going to plan dinner and you've got to cook for your family that night, you're going to have a quick conversation with your partner about what we're going to do, pull out a recipe, maybe if you feel like making something fancy, and then you're going to get on with it, right? But there is a plan. We know what we're going to cook. We're not just randomly pulling saucepans off the shelves and pouring food into them. We do have a plan, right? So we have a recipe or something. And while we're creating, while we're doing the garden or whatever it is, we periodically stop and we look at the work we've done. We reflect on it. And if we're doing it in partnership with 2 or 3 other people, then we will talk about it. How's it going? Do you need some help on the bit that you're doing? And then we go back to work. That's our stand-up meeting, right? At the end of the day, or whatever that period of time is, we can look at what we've made and we can decide if we like it or not. And if we're working on someone else's garden, we'll call them out of the house and say, look at the work we've done. This is what we've completed today. Do you like it? Do you want any changes? Do you want something different tomorrow? And they'll give us some feedback. We'll go off, chat about how the day went and what we might do differently the next day. See, the elements of Scrum are all there, aren't they? That's what Scrum is. That's all it is. It's just the creative process, formalized. Right. So how can we not do it? You can't really do creative work and not follow that pattern. That is the pattern of creative work. And it makes sense. So yes, it makes sense. Now, if you're doing Scrum by renaming your project managers to Scrum Masters, and your marketing managers to product owners, or your BAs to product owners is more common. And nothing's really changing. You're still doing all this big upfront planning. There's still a barrier to collaboration between business and development. Then you're not actually doing Scrum. If you're not learning as you go, you're not actually doing Scrum. If you're not changing the way you do things, you're not doing Scrum. So you're calling what you do Scrum, but isn't Scrum. But people who don't use the word Scrum might be doing Scrum more than people who are calling it Scrum.
When you mentioned the planning piece and now came back to the what is it and what probably isn't it in a meaningful way, I was thinking about the word intent, because intention, I mean, again, planning I could exchange by intent and just say, well, we intend to. We don't know yet because we're living in a world of surprise. Let's see what our customer says, or what the market reacts, how the market reacts to, or what's feasible, what's possible, and all these. But we intend to. And if we approach an initiative with other people, maybe with a new way of collaborating, there is an intention of I want to do that, right? And that brings me actually to this idea of how to start, as you just said. If I just set up a process, a framework, and rename roles and bits and pieces, and literally treat the organization like a machine instead of an organism, because that's what I like these 2 metaphors, then all I get is this mechanics. People following rules potentially. They don't like it. They were never asked or anything. And whatever it is, they have no intention. They just say, well, I go to the office. Today they call it this way, tomorrow this way. I do my job to get my money. And, well, I love my colleagues. And somehow I'm still able to communicate with them, despite all the process and despite Scrum, maybe even.
Yeah. People get stuff done, don't they? Despite all that, really, they spend a lot of time working around all the nonsense that gets imposed on it.
Right.
So yeah, it's a problem. I mean, it's a problem, but I don't think it's a particularly new problem. I think that organizations have struggled. Scrum made some important changes, I think, and all of those ways of working, that mindset, starting with, well, probably even before, but Evo back in the 1970s, fast iterations and involving your customer. And we, so there was some good changes that occurred there, and the early adopters of this probably did really well, and probably still are doing really well with it. It's the ones that come later who just sort of see that other people are being successful and want some of it. They want the results without doing the work. Too often, right? But that's a kind of modern day mindset, isn't it? That's kind of what we want. We want quick fixes to things.
Yeah. And now it brings me already to something I wanted to point out here, because having meaningful conversations with Tobias Mayer is something where I can take a shortcut and point to something you published a few years ago. I don't even remember. Was it 14?
It was in 2013, actually, that book was first published. Yeah, and then there was an audio version with some additions and changes in last year, 2020.
Exactly, and it's this the People Scrum. I got known to it via a friend of mine, Olaf Lewitz, who I think took the initiative to translate it into German. And the People Scrum is an incredibly useful. I don't want to underestimate, let's say, undervalue the work. Compilation would be a wrong term, but aggregation, maybe. How do you create a masterpiece? Out of different pieces of essays, of blog posts of yours from the earlier days.
Collage, Mike. That's what it is.
Oh yeah, right. That's it.
Or it's a bedspread.
Here's. Did you speak the audiobook? Is that?
I did, yeah. I did it because I had nothing to do when the lockdown occurred. I had no work, and the days were beautiful, and the sun was coming up in the morning. So I sat in my garden and I read my book to myself, and I recorded it.
Sure, and this is what I recommend. This is what I mean, looking at the audiobook, I mean, this is probably even nicer to take in, maybe even as a team, or read the book, but there is material in there we can use for meaningful conversations. And this is why I wanted to attach to it a little bit. Where there is one essay where you talk about Jeff Sutherland's shock therapy, which he long time ago somewhere published, how they approached organizations and teams just to get in and follow what they intend to be Scrum about. And this is an interesting piece because, once again, I want to put it out here. Probably most people who are into this business, or how do we call it, value Jeff Sutherland's work, right? There's 25, 30 years of research and tons of passion and everything. Which made this even possible. But on the other hand side, we know Jeff's publications like twice everybody knows, work in half the time, and the hyper-productive team, and so on and so forth. So here we go.
10x
or 6, wasn't it 16? I think it was 16 even, right?
It's interesting. Jeff's public front around Scrum is what we see, obviously. But I had a conversation with him once at a conference, just on a one-to-one conversation. And I asked him how Scrum, actually Lisa Atkins said to me, go and ask Jeff how he started Scrum. And essentially it came down to Jeff's efforts to create an abundant culture out of a culture of scarcity. That was the seed of it. Right. Now that's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah. Working in a culture of scarcity where there's not enough time, not enough money, not enough people, not enough resources, not enough anything, nothing gets done. And his challenge was, how do I take this and make it a culture of abundance? Yeah. And that's what we did. And that's what Scrum came out of. It's about focus. That was the key, right? Focus. Right. Create abundance out of scarcity through focus. Now, when he talks in that way, I'm so engaged with the mission, if you like, from that. But when he talks about, 10 times the speed and hyper productivity and bootstrapping teams and getting them to follow the rules, and it's, I see the intent, but I don't like it because I don't think it's kind, and I don't think it's engaging.
Right.
It's quite telling, actually. That essay was written, I don't know, it's probably got a date on it. Let me look. 2009 or something like that. It's quite a long time ago. 2008. Shock therapy or compassion. And Jeff Sutherland and his colleague who worked at the company were creating this brilliant way of like getting things done really, really fast. The company was MySpace. Now everyone knows, well, not everyone, but most people know the history of MySpace, right? It didn't. I think it died around 2009, 2010. It went out pretty much out of business. It got completely obliterated from the market. So yes, they were producing tons of stuff and they were releasing faster. It's just that they were releasing the wrong stuff. So it wasn't useful after all, And I think, twice the work in half the time, maybe, but was it the right work? And I think that's where, a lot of people these days are not focusing on output, are they? They're focusing on
outcome. Right.
What is the value that we're delivering? Rather deliver less high value, high quality than more stuff we don't want. How do we've done with all that? That's in the should be in the past now.
Yeah. Now, I mean, what it points me to, what I want to bring in here is the actual question: how to skillfully start a Scrum initiative, or get it started, or bring people to the table. Because maybe it's even not a good idea to say, "Hey, we're going to start this," right? Like most organizations, specifically larger organizations, who have, first of all, this Agile initiative going and then saying, okay, I've got two choices, Scrum and Kanban. So either it's one of the two. But probably this is not a very helpful approach as such. But how would we approach?
Well, I think, Mike, you would approach it like you would approach starting a garden, right? So you don't necessarily know what kind of seeds are going to grow well in your soil. So you don't go ahead and buy thousands of daffodil seeds and bed your whole garden with daffodils only to find out the soil was the wrong kind or there wasn't enough sun or something like that. You might experiment with one corner of the garden growing one flower and another corner growing another flower. And so this Scrum needs to, any change, I think any organizational change needs to be organic rather than mechanical, right? It needs to grow, and it needs to grow from a seed. So and a successful way I've seen of people introducing Scrum into the organization is literally that, is to plant a seed. So to have one team in a large organization focus on one project or one product that they're making, and have all the people that they need in their team, allow the team. So here's an example. A company I worked for did that, and they started off with with me, who was a sort of consultant, helping them set up, and I think 2 developers we had, and who we brought in, and one who was already working there. So we had 3 people who started building the software that they needed for this new product, and we quickly realized we didn't have enough people. It wasn't that we didn't have enough people, it's that we didn't have the right skills. It wasn't about numbers of people. It was like, we're missing good UI skills here, or we're missing, none of us are really good at testers. So let's bring in a testing expert. Let's bring in a UI person.
Right.
And the team grew to around 7 people, but it was still one team. And it was amazingly successful with the rate and the speed that they worked at and the quality that they produced. And it was enough then to say, let's try this somewhere else, because this is growing quite nicely. Let's plant another seed over here and spin up another team. And so it begins to develop that way.
Yeah.
What of course you don't want to do is what some people do, is they got a perfectly working team, and then they say, 7 people on the team, let's break them all apart and have 7 new teams seeded by these 7 people. You're obviously going to lose something, aren't you?
Getting back to the successful team, what do you think was the essence that it worked out so nicely, that it was possible for them to grow beyond what they did before? Any memories?
It's exceptional people. That's it. It's just exceptional people. Exceptional in that they were highly skilled at what they did. The company, the consulting company who they worked for, were very good at picking really good people. And but not only were they good at their work, they had humility. They had the ability to recognize their faults and to want to get better. and share ideas and not to be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, were they hired for that? Maybe to some extent they might have been, but it just worked out in that way. And then you nurture it, right? So you see that that's already there, and you build on it. And we built on that. You know, and we tried to help new people who joined the team. There was one guy who worked for the company for years who hardly said boo to a goose, you know, and so trying to get him to show up in the retrospectives was really challenging at first, but slowly over time, without forcing it, by having lunch with the team every day, he started to talk, and it turned out he had really good input, you know, but he needed to get there. So it's about not rushing, and it's about respecting the individual. That's how you build a good team. It's recognizing the people for who they are, not trying to make them fit some sort of a mold of a perfect person or a perfect team.
Yeah. So that reminds me, obviously, on the famous sentence, people over tools, right? People over processes and tools.
That's the one line that attracted me to this in the first place. When I saw that, I was just immediately hooked. I thought that, because I was working in the world of you know, business and software, but it's all about process. And so this was a way out for me. That's what I saw.
Right. So that would be obviously the trigger. So getting back to the original question, how, for example, as a coach, and well, if there is no Scrum yet, there's no Scrum Master, except we're in a big hierarchy or big organization, because of course there are Scrum Masters already. But let's say people getting together and somebody being called in from the outside, call them a coach, consultant, what else, could help them to create a container, an environment where people, first of all, just get together, right? And have conversations. Here's a comment, just joined and caught. It's about not rushing and respecting the individual. It's about not rushing and respecting the individual. Exactly. And bringing individuals into a room, opening up, helping them facilitate maybe a little bit the conversation. Like, here is a challenge, here's a goal. This is maybe what we did in the past. What do we see about it? What did we learn about it? If we didn't learn anything yet, I don't know, what can we learn now? And if there was an alternative way, what would we love to do? I'm not sure if there's any organization out there. I have, none of my clients has this patience, unfortunately, because that requires patience, right? It might be like,
you know, one of the things that I learned from Boris Glogo is one of the earlier Scrum trainers. You might know him. He's in your part.
I know him. He's in the German-speaking region, well known.
So he taught me. You know, he asked me the question. He said, "What's the first thing you do when you go to an organization and they want to change?" And I didn't have an answer. I didn't know. And he said to me, "You do a retrospective." And I'm like, "Well, wait, a retrospective is supposed to come at the end, isn't it?" But I kind of quickly figured out what he meant, obviously. And of course, you go in because you're acknowledging that they are exactly where they are. And some things are working really well for them and some things are not. Right. And that's the point. You walk in, right? So let's discover what that is, first of all. So without going in and trying to say, let's do Scrum or let's do Kanban or whatever it is. And so let's find out who you are, where you are, and what you're striving for. What's your intent? That's that again, right? And it's a lovely starting point. And you probably could and should spend a couple of days exploring all of that.
Exactly.
You know, so
it's quite interesting that you say that, because it rings a bell with me. You're a Scrum trainer. We probably hate the word trainer because where did I hear that from?
I don't like it.
From Cope. James Copeland said, I think training is what you do to dogs.
Animals, dogs, and HR people do.
Okay, that's naughty. But anyway, I didn't say that. But
it's okay. It's the word that people use, isn't it? I'm okay with it.
That's the point. So, but I'm also doing this stuff, and this is the unskillful way. Basically, I was thinking about before, by the way. So, how we usually get Scrum into an organization? Well, let's get first of all people. Let's say, you know, the teams, you know, the listed, who's on the list, who will get on the team, then get them trained, then get them started. This is a little bit, but anyway, I did a co-training with a colleague in Germany, Jürgen Hoffmann, who is one of the CSTs in Germany, one of the long-standing CSTs. And that was also the same thing. The first exercise he did was, let's do a retrospective. So we formed groups. The very first exercise in the whole training was form groups, new Scrum Masters, you are now facilitators. Here's a checklist. I get together with all the Scrum Masters, and now you run a retrospective about their experiences from the past, from the recent past. And that will carve out, while the exercise, if anybody's interested, we can share it with the permission of Jürgen, will add requirements or needs to the backlog, to the training backlog. Right. And that was also for me the same thing in a very small container, but to say in a container of a training, I would never start with a retro, right? Usually. But I applied this multiple times myself then afterwards. And it's a very, very helpful thing to say, let's first of all just get people together and think about what we can learn before we even do something new.
Well, it makes perfect sense, isn't it? Because a retrospective is looking back in order to move forward. And wherever you are, whatever your starting point is, there's always a back. There's always something that happened already. So let's start off by looking at that. And there's always an intent. There's always somewhere to go. So it does, if we change the word from retrospective to something else, and forward thinking or something, I don't know what it would be, the word or the opposite of that is. But yeah, it's the same idea. Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah, but in a training class as well, if you've got a bunch of people coming into CSM or some other class, and their needs are all different, aren't they? They don't all, unless you're inside a company. If you're doing it inside a company, it's a similar approach to, if you're doing consulting there. But if you're doing a public class, you've got lots of different people coming there from lots of different places with lots of different abilities and lots of different needs. And if you don't find out what they are pretty early on, then you're going to be teaching the wrong stuff, mostly. Right. I mean, there's some really, you could teach Scrum in a couple of hours, really, to be honest. And the rest, what you do the rest of the 2 days, well, you try and contextualize it and you try and get people to appreciate how they might apply what they're learning into their own space. And by getting knowledge of what their space is and what their particular needs are, you get a much richer class from that.
Exactly. Yeah. While you were saying that, I was just curious. I made a note once from Alistair Coburn where he explains Scrum, and I think that would take you not longer than 5 minutes. It's 5 points. So the Scrum guide even shorter. Deliver every sprint, assemble a competent cross-functional team, let them run their own work. Inspect, adapt daily and after each sprint. The Scrum Master is the chief impediment remover, and the business customer side speaks through one voice through the product owner. That's for him Scrum on a napkin.
I love that. I haven't seen that, Mike.
I'll drop you a link here. I'll post the link.
Yeah, it's spot on. That is.
I'll post the link.
Then what you've got seeds of conversation, right? Or people say, "Can you tell me a bit more about that? What does that mean? What kind of impediments? When did you?" So you get conversation. It's not a document that you read and follow. It's a conversation that needs to continue. So it's beautiful. I love it. Good old Alistair. He does.
Yeah, we'll put the link. I mean, first of all, I'll share it with you. He's got it in his web archives. He's got a very rich web archive, and kept this one because I also loved it. And we'll share it on the LinkedIn thread of this video. But what you just said, conversation is the thing, and having a skillful conversation amongst people, if they're not coming from a really, different background, I think is something we unlearned. Because in business, we're usually not welcome, especially in larger organizations, to have a lot of conversations which are meaningful.
We're not invited in, are we? That's true.
Exactly. We're not, the invitation piece. That's why we always have this water cooler thing, right? To say the great conversations are there because that's where we don't have any force, where we don't have to stick to rules. We don't have to get our work done until 5 in the afternoon, but we can talk about important things where we say, how did you approach this? How do you actually deal with this challenge and everything alike?
Yeah.
So,
one of the things about the Scrum, what they call the Scrum events now, and they used to be called meetings, and then they were called ceremonies. I remind people what they really are, and what they really are is conversation. There are conversations to discover and align is essentially what they are. They're all alignment of one kind or another. But without conversations, it's, people say, I don't want to go to meetings, I just want to get on with the work. Well, sure, but what is the work if you don't have a conversation about it first? If I just say, go to the kitchen and start and cook me dinner, and I don't give you any indication of what food you're going to cook, or what, you have no idea where to begin, do you? You just might make something that's completely horrible.
Right.
Useless.
Right. That is where maybe the Scrum guide, which we consciously left out because we came to the conclusion there is way smarter ways to put it very small, but have the conversation about it instead of even reading 13 pages and then saying, okay, this is the Bible. But just to mention it, one of the last changes to say there is only one team. I'm not sure how you deal about that, but I love it to say there is no, although it was somehow in the early days a meaningful way to, first of all, separate concerns and then balance them out, like, the tech side with the business side. But in the same time, we forgot, I think, and I'm not sure about your experiences, that we're sitting in the same boat. And sometimes developers, not product developers, became like order takers from business, right? And it was not about.
I think this is true. So, I mean, yes, if we work with the same company, right? We're all headed to the same place. It's like if I hire some contractors in my house to do some redecorating, we have to be aligned, right? Because they're working, and it's the thing they're making we all care about. They care about the quality of the making, and I care about the end product, and we care, and we talk, and we get things done. But at the same time, we need space to be with the group of people that we best identify with and that we relate to on a day-to-day basis. So I don't want to be sitting around talking to the people doing the work in my house, the plumbers or whatever it is, because I'll be in the way and I'll be a nuisance. So we need to have these important conversations and then separate out. It's a diverge, converge kind of model, right? We come together, we go apart into our separate groups, units, to do the work that we're good at and that we're paid to do, and then we come back. So we're going out and in and out and in. Is that kind of model is what's happening when you're doing Scrum. So yes, it's one team, but let's not take that too far where you think everyone's always got to be in every meeting. You've got to have the product owner and the Scrum Master at every stand-up meeting, and you might as well invite the customers into that as well. It's inappropriate.
Right.
So, we need to find appropriate times to meet with each other.
Yeah,
and that's discovery, right? That's not you. The Scrum guy tries to encode all that, and it the more they try to get it right in the Scrum guide, the more holes they make. You know, it's this idea of when you try to, this is literally true. If you try to nail something down more and more, you are literally putting more holes in it, aren't you? And so it's exactly like that when you try to perfect a document. You know, it's like nailing it down and it just ends up full of holes.
Yeah.
It's too rigid.
And that's quite interesting, because if we would really be able to leave as much space open as possible, what you just said, go through conversations, bring people in, having conversations, become more skillful at it, looking at a direction and more aligned, wouldn't be a good start. Would be actually learning Scrum, not from the book, not from a training, not from the Scrum guide, but through exploring their own process. And then being coached through that, where people might, get into challenges, but actually this way, making a decision where they decide this is a meaningful way for us right from the beginning, if you like.
I think that, we need to get into practice as soon as we can with this. And so even within a training class, again, you don't need to sit there talking about Scrum and showing slides about Scrum and looking at diagrams. You need to say it's not quite as short perhaps as Alistair Coburn's thing, but it's maybe a morning, probably a morning on a 2-day course will be enough. And then you practice it, then you get into practice and you find some format or some way of creating products in teams using Scrum and getting feedback along the way and experiencing what it's like. When I do Scrum online now, the workshops run over a number of days. And after some initial conversation about what Scrum is, people form teams and they start building product. Recently, teams have been making books of poetry about Scrum, cover to cover, with the design and the illustrations and everything. And they end up at the end of this time with a deep knowledge of Scrum because they're in it and they're getting into all of the disagreements that teams will have and the differences of opinion. They're turning to their Scrum Master, who's usually a colleague of mine, to help us out and could you support us through this? And they're doing their stand-up meetings at the end of each day. And it's really quite extraordinary. And the products they create are really very, very good. People surprise themselves. But without that experience of doing Scrum, how do you know what? You haven't really learned anything. You just learned the theory.
And that would also... So obviously that would also drop the sprint zero idea totally, right? This idea of we need to first of all prepare and
you need to start. You need to, and this has never been a Scrum thing, right? And Ken Schwaber's always been really clear on there's no sprint zero. It's a nonsense term. As soon as you start work, you produce value. At the end of that sprint, you produce value. If you go back to that list of 5 things that Alistair Coburn said, I think that was the first one, wasn't it? Wasn't that the first thing? Deliver value every sprint.
Deliver every sprint, yes.
And
obviously, or demo every sprint, he puts in brackets. But
Heinrich Nieberg had this really cool checklist for Scrum about years ago about all of the different things you had to do if you were doing Scrum.
Exactly.
But there was a shortcut on it, and it had 3 things that you have to do. And if you can say yes to these 3, ignore the rest of my checklist.
Right.
Deliver value, retrospect regularly, and something else. Scrum in a nutshell. You're doing those 3 things, and it's really that one thing. Is are you delivering value every 2 weeks or whatever?
Right.
If you're doing that, then something's going right.
So, we're already 35 minutes into the conversation. We don't want to take it too long. So today was obviously about, and you see this is about emergence a little bit, was about how to start maybe more skillfully in a Scrum environment other than what we already see, the industrialization. Elizabeth, whom we know, put in here, she just recently heard that we certainly don't have enough conversations around here to get this done. Somebody obviously of her clients or something mentioned, and so here's the solution, right? That's what Scrum is about. It's not about busy bang bang, as a friend of mine used to say, but it's about deeper thinking, conversations around things, and what you said, alignment, taking decisions as a team. One thing that comes to my mind is actually still this one thing, resistance, right? I mean, let's say challenges in the beginning where we see, well, some people might have an easier time to buy in, and others just say, nah, I don't like it. And I still always refer to Peter Senge. People don't resist change, they resist being changed. A very simple term, and we can talk tons about it, but I would say, well, it has probably a meaning, because if we would resist change, right, we wouldn't probably use video communication today. We wouldn't have gone here up until here. But there is something about being changed, but still, people, maybe it's not the resistance, maybe it is just fear.
I heard it slightly differently. People don't resist change; they resist coercion, and being changed is a bit like coercion. We don't want someone else to come along and tell us how we ought to be. We already have enough of that in the world of education, school, and workplaces. So what we need, the change needs to come through inspiring people. Creating vision and intent where people want to go there. It looks exciting. One of the ways we spread Scrum at that one organization I mentioned earlier is by having an open team room that people could look into as they went by. We weren't behind closed doors. And people saw that the furniture had a completely different arrangement in there. There was exciting things going on. There was loads of stuff on the wall. There were pictures around, and there were people arguing in front of a chart and moving things around. And they were intrigued by it. And no one said to them, you should be doing this. But they were coming along, and they kept coming back and peering in. And they would say, I want one. Can I have that? One of those calendars. Can I have the sticky note chart like that? What are you guys doing? Can I join? It was that sort of attitude. And then, so we seeded it that way by doing it well. It's the principle of attraction rather than promotion, right? We didn't go around evangelizing Scrum. I've done that in the past, in my early days, and it's a disaster. you end up just annoying people, right? But this was different. They were attracted to what we were doing. So
So it reminds me of another one where when I attended, I think Craig Larman's large-scale Scrum course in Munich. Again, it was just a training. I was a participant. There was, by coincidence, a class going on next door, which was a PMI training course for project managers. And obviously, we had totally different settings on the walls, because there were nearly no slides in our room, and there was everything decorated on the walls. And on the other side, they obviously had a slideshow. And by coincidence, after the first break, somebody had confused the rooms and was by coincidence in our class and thought she was in a PMI course. I don't know how that could have happened. I can't remember. Maybe she was late and missed the introduction and then just came in and saw, okay, what was going on. but she didn't want to leave first. She just
I
said,
bet. Yeah.
I just remember that. Nice story. But again, I don't want to talk bad about other things as such. Well, I do, just sometimes do, but it's more about not talking bad, but talking more consciously about things. And so there are ways, obviously, to rethink how we approach, I call it approach or narrow this way of working. Well, we might even avoid the term Scrum, but just to say, this is about strong conversations. It's about intention. It's about intentionality, alignment, being able to deal with diverse ideas too, right? But because there will be friction, no doubt.
Yes, there will be. I was doing a workshop, I think it was yesterday, on conflict resolution.
Right.
Which is a bit ineptly named because it's not really about resolving conflict. No. It's about embracing it and utilizing it effectively. But that is a form of resolution, I suppose. But it's getting away from toxicity, you know. But that kind of thing, we want it. We want to have that. If we don't have that, we're not innovating. We're not doing anything exciting.
Right.
People are in agreement all the time.
Right.
This is the danger. I mean, this is why people talk a lot about having diversity in your teams now. I mean, it's usually focused on gender and racial diversity, but there's lots of other different kinds of diversities as well, isn't it? We want people to not agree. We want people to come from very different perspectives in life and very different backgrounds. We want age diversity is a really good one.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got a team of people who've been doing their development work for the last 20, 30 years, they've lost touch. Let's face it. Most of them have lost touch. You know, very few people stay current. You get someone straight out of college joining that team, it's going to shake it up in a really healthy way. But they might not like it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the conflict, right?
I once heard this phrase, it might be from Google, but it was attached to this growth mindset idea. I think strong opinions weakly held. Sort of this principle, like saying, I have a strong opinion. I'm an expert on my topic. I have a background, but I'm not attached to it. I won't fight for it.
Yeah.
You know, sort of, there might be even a little bit of infight, but, you know, in terms of, you know, being
plays out the other way around, though, doesn't it, Mike? It's usually weak opinions strongly held. That's more.
Well, the weak might be, but it could be, I don't want to stop or finish our today's conversation without pointing to your website, which is somehow obvious to be as Tobias Mayer UK. Obvious in terms of your name, but because you're running these days a lot of interesting workshops, not only Scrum trainings, but also workshops around this notion of, and I love to, you know, invite people. Nowadays, it's so easy without traveling to join. And you mentioned multi-session things. Anything which is going on, which is on your mind? You might be busy not knowing what's coming next, but anything you.
Yeah, I mean, I've got two interesting ones coming up. One's called Deconstructing Agile, and it's a workshop I've done in person a few times, but I've never done it online yet. So I'm curious to see about that. So the idea of deconstructing is to take the thing, in this case Agile, strip it down to its bare bones essentially, and look at its essence and rebuild it. And I think that, you know, what happens over people deconstruct books, and there's a big movement of deconstructing Christianity right now. You know, it's got so bloated and so padded with so many different new ideas that have nothing to do with the original essence of it. And this is true of Agile too. I think, you know, there's this manifesto. It's like 2 pages, isn't it, essentially?
Right.
And it's been, so much stuff has been like added to it over the years, and it's been packaged up in multiple different ways and sold. And you know, if we take all that away from it and come back to even more basic, get rid of the principles, even just look at those 4 values or something, and then so what can we do with a rebuild of that? So deconstructing is about getting to the essence of something and rebuilding it. So I'm doing a workshop on that, and I'm also doing a workshop called Grassroots Leadership, which is really, it used to be called Thoughtful Citizenship, with the idea that it's sort of a take on thought leader, right? Because this idea that only leaders think is nonsense in the knowledge world, right? We all think in the knowledge. We have to. That's our job, right? So, thought citizen. But people didn't get the term. You look it up on Google, it doesn't mean anything. So grassroots leadership is what it is. It's leadership from the ground up,
That sounds
where
great.
everyone is involved in leadership. Everyone is
Yeah,
involved in as they need to.
yeah.
Stuff like
English.
that coming up.
Yeah, so that's a strong recommendation. I've not been to these workshops, but knowing your work from reading and following your work, that's obviously great and probably interesting and insightful. And yeah, there was a final comment here, but I just want to pick it briefly to be also polite. Strong conversations and acting on what may come out of these conversations. Yeah, this is sort of, I would say, what we said in the beginning, right? We can stick to theory for weeks, but at a certain point in time, this is also what Alistair Cockburn says. We need to deliver. So the act of delivering is actually putting out in front of us what we have hypothesized for quite a while, if it's too long. And the result we see might not be what we expect. And this is sometimes fearful for many, right? To say, who knows if they don't like it? Who knows if it's not good enough? What if nobody wants it, right? Well, this is what we want to learn as quick as possible, right?
We want to
What
find
we
that out
think.
fast. Yeah.
So I love this too. Of course, it's also about doing. It's not only about talking. And I think that's what the framework as such thinks about. But framework already itself is another term.
We must remember that the conversations in Scrum are deliberately time boxed. They're to be short, so we can spend the majority of our time experimenting and playing and getting on with making something that can be potentially of value. And if it isn't, we find that out quite quickly. Don't sit around all day talking about what you're going to do. Have just enough conversation. There's got to be a bit of a sense of urgency about this. I mean, we don't want to be living in an urgency space all the time, but we want to have a sense of like urgent and important. We want to be getting on with this. It matters.
We didn't set a time box for our conversation here, but we're probably already coming to a sort of the point where we might just say, call it a conversation, because we can have follow-ups. It doesn't always need to be 45 minutes. I would love to have a follow-up conversation with you about one topic, which is obviously really burning for many organizations: virtual collaboration or virtual teams, because it is. Now I'm pointing to your book again. There is a chapter about where you say if people are distributed specifically all over time zones in the globe, they can't be a team. Well, this article comes from a time when there was no COVID, no pandemic, no lockups.
Definitely have to rethink stuff like that, right?
Yeah,
the book is called the chapter's called "Distributed Teams Are Not Teams," and it's quite a bold statement, quite an arrogant statement, really, isn't it? And today, people disagree with it at the time. And I didn't disagree with their disagreement. It's a generalization, of course. It's not specific. But I think the generalization is shifting, and there is a lot more success than there was prior to all of this. The tools have got better. Our ways of working have changed. A lot of the pain that came about at the beginning of this was of the virtual world was very simply lack of protocol. We didn't know how to interact with each other online. We knew how to do it in the office because it developed over years. It was an innate protocol that we had. But suddenly online, cameras on, cameras off. Is it are able to switch your mic off? How well engaged do you have to be? Is your person running the meeting? Do they have the right to make you turn your camera on if you don't want it on? And so, and all of this stuff is about, I don't want you looking in my home. What's the protocol around that? Nobody knew, and very few teams sat down to actually have those conversations. They just assumed that everyone thought the way they did. Big mistake, obviously. So there's a lot of pain in the beginning of the first 6 months or so, probably. So distributed teams in that situation were breaking because of things like that, but they've learned how to work around that. Not work around it. They've learned how to make a great environment to work in.
Exactly. And I think there is still something going on, right? Like hybrid is the discussion about hybrid and the question about getting back to offices. Is it voluntary? Is it forced? How much time to spend, where and when, and how much, and whatever. So I think this is a huge topic to attach these ways of working again with a more meaningful, skillful way where you can, let's say, create better outcomes or create better organizations and outcomes from there. But I would encourage everyone who's listening, either now live or watching the video later, maybe get to the book, get to the audiobook. It's free. It's on Tobias' website. Put the link in here once again. You will probably find it via Google.
There's a short link for that, by the way. It's tobiasmayer.uk/TPS.
All right.
That's all you need. /TPS.
Okay. I could have asked you. I didn't ask you for this, so I was just.
I don't like long URLs. I never remember them. So.
Yeah, it's true. But this one is somehow speaking for itself. Anyway, there is a free audiobook, and you can listen to it, and then see what other views people get in from collaborating in an agile space, primarily Scrum, but it doesn't need to be Scrum, but to say, how do you see this? How do you work with your teams, become more effective, hybrid? What's going on? How do you approach that? How do you coach that, or do you just force it? And that can also address leaders who are now in this situation who say, I would love to, but my boss tells me I can't, or HR doesn't tells me this is our policy. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And in times where jobs become maybe rare, we don't know what happens. But for today, I would just like to thank you, Tobias. It was a lovely conversation. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too.
I did. It was fun. It's always fun chatting with you, Mike. I enjoy it.
It might be time for a cup of tea, right? Because that's the UK. I know coffee now.
Yeah.
And see you next time. And thanks to everyone who put their conversations. And
thanks everyone for being here. I just want you to know I can't see anybody except Mike, and I can't see any of the comments. So I'm running as blind as everyone else on this. Mike's in control of this, and I know that you're there, and thank you for being there. So
beautiful.
See you back on LinkedIn.
Bye. Thanks, Tobias. Bye.
Cheers, Mike. Bye.